Amma woke up from a terrifying dream, her heart beating through her chest as her entire body shook in terror. "Mommy! Daddy!" She screamed out loud as her parents rushed in to check up on her.
She wants to take me away.
Amma said persistently as she cried and begged her mother not to leave her alone in her room. Her mother Ekene, seeing how terrified her daughter was, decided to sleep over in her room, holding her tight and reassuring her that no one was out to get her. It was just a nightmare, Ekene said to Amma, who drifted into a deep sleep, knowing that her mother was right there with her. When morning came, Ekene noticed some scratch marks on her daughter's arm. "Why did you scratch yourself?" she asked Amma, who told her that it was the woman in her dream. "Come off it," Ekene said, as she trimmed Amma's nails and got her ready for school. Later that afternoon, Ekene and her husband Ahanna decided to attend their midweek service in church. It was such a pleasant time in the presence of the Lord. After the service, they walked towards their car when they caught sight of a pregnant woman who looked so distressed, weeping at the corner of the church alone. Everyone seemed to ignore the woman as though she was invisible, and this troubled Ekene, who could not bring herself to ignoring a pregnant woman in distress. She approached her to find out why she was crying, and the woman revealed to her that her husband died in his sleep a few days ago, leaving her all alone in this wicked world. His family, on hearing about his death, threw her out of her husband's house, believing that she had a hand in her husband's death. She told Ekene that she came to the church that evening to pray to God to send a helper her way because she was at the verge of ending it all. Ekene could not help but feel compassion for the poor woman. She asked where she lived at the moment, and the woman revealed to her that she was currently staying in an uncompleted building down the road. This was such a devastating story for Ekene, who remembered how her own mother suffered a similar fate in the hands of her wicked uncles who took everything from them after her father died. It was such a painful time for Ekene, who had to hawk on the streets for years to support her poor mother. Unwilling to see another woman suffer the same fate as her mother, Ekene spoke to her husband, who could not help but feel pity for the poor widow. They offered her their boys' quarters, promising to take care of all her needs. The woman, whose name was Ginika, was so overwhelmed with gratitude and couldn't believe her ears. She thanked them for their kindness as they drove together to their home. A few minutes later, they arrived their home and the woman could not believe how beautiful their house was. Their little daughter Amma, on hearing their car pull up in the driveway, rushed out to greet her parents when she was confronted by the sight of the strange woman. She quickly rushed to her mother's side to ask who the strange woman was, and her mother informed her that the woman would be living with them for a while. Amma did not seem too pleased to hear this. She told her mother that she did not like the woman, but her mother laughed it off and advised her to be more receptive of strangers. Ekene then showed Ginika to the boys' quarters, which had everything that she would ever need. Once she was settled, she returned to the main house and met her daughter Amma, who looked so worried and terrified. This was so weird because Amma was such a cheerful and outgoing girl. Her mother Ekene approached her to confirm why she looked so gloomy, and Amma confessed to her mother that she had a terrifying dream about the woman a few days ago. "How is that possible when you have never met her before?" her mother asked, as she assured Amma that it was her mind playing tricks on her. Amma pleaded with her mother to send the strange woman away, but her mother reassured her that it was only a dream and that Ginika was in need of their help as she had nowhere else to go. She told Amma that Ginika was only with them for a while and that she should not worry her little self. Amma was however not convinced, as she dreaded the thought of living in the same house as Ginika. She approached her father and made the same complaint to him, but her father was equally dismissive, attributing her fears to the imagination of a little girl. He assured her that everything would be fine and urged her to give Ginika a chance. However, despite her parents' reassurances, Amma was still terrified. She went to sleep that night and heard a weird sound coming from under her bed. Amma checked to see what it was and saw a scary-looking monkey with red eyes. She screamed at the top of her voice, waking her mother and father, who rushed to check up on her. They arrived at her room and met Amma terrified.
There's a monkey underneath my bed,
Amma said to her parents, who checked and found nothing under the bed. Her father revealed to her that there was nothing there and that she most likely had a terrifying dream, but Amma insisted that a monkey was under her bed. Her mother Ekene, seeing how petrified she looked, assured her that she was only seeing things and that there was no monkey in her room, but Amma stood her grounds, insisting that she saw a monkey underneath her bed. Her mother decided to stay with her until she fell asleep. The next morning, Amma prepared for school. She was leaving the house and caught sight of Ginika, who smiled at her and asked how she liked the monkey. This question terrified Amma, who got into the car speedily, her heart racing because she knew that Ginika was up to no good. However, she could not understand why her parents were hell-bent on allowing Ginika live in their home. On their way to school, Amma pleaded with her mother once again to send Ginika away, and her mother flared up in anger because she could not understand why her daughter had refused to be accommodating of the poor widow. She told Amma that if she continued to speak ill of Ginika without any reason, she would be punished severely, and Amma, feeling so helpless, remained quiet till she got to school. All she could think about was the monkey she saw underneath her bed. Amma dreaded the thought of returning home, as she wished that time would freeze forever so that she would remain in school, because she feared what would happen to her in her own home. Later that evening, Amma came down for dinner and met her mother, who was having a discussion with Ginika in their living room. She was so terrified as she barely spoke to her mother and tried to rush up to the dining table, but her mother called her back to greet Ginika properly. Amma looked into Ginika's eyes and felt a cold shiver run through her spine. She was so terrified that she peed on herself and began to tremble in fear. Her mother, on seeing what had just happened, apologized to Ginika and took Amma up to her room to change her soiled clothes. "What has come over you?" Ekene yelled at her daughter angrily as she told her to snap out of her irrational behavior and fear. She decided to tell her daughter why Ginika was living with them, hoping that this would calm her down and make her more receptive of the poor widow. She even went further to tell her daughter that they met Ginika in church and that there was no way that she could be a threat to anyone. "She's just a poor widow who needs our help," Ekene said to her daughter Amma, reiterating the need to show her kindness and compassion, especially at this critical time when she just lost her husband. Amma nodded in agreement, despite the fact that she was still shaking in fear. A few hours later, after careful deliberation of all that her mother had said, Amma decided to pay Ginika a visit at the boys' quarters to apologize to her for all she had done. She arrived at the house and saw something that she never imagined possible. Amma caught sight of Ginika sleeping with both of her legs hanging up in the air. Ginika did not look pregnant either and was sleeping in such a weird position. Fear gripped Amma, who quietly returned to her room, unable to understand what she had just seen. She tried to speak to her mother about it, but her mother warned her to stop peddling lies about Ginika. Amma could see how agitated her mother was and returned to her room broken as she wondered why her mother never believed anything that she said. Later that night, Amma struggled to fall asleep. She had a feeling that something terrible was going to happen to her, so she approached her parents in their room and pleaded for them to allow her sleep in their bed, but they refused and sent her back to her room. Amma had never been this shaken in her entire life. As she lay in bed, she heard a weird sound, but this time it was accompanied by a whisper. Her heart pounded as she looked around her room, trying to find the source of the whisper. She saw a shadow moving in the corner of her room. Filled with terror, she hid under her blanket, hoping that it would just go away. Suddenly, the whisper became louder, and Amma felt a cold hand touch her legs. She screamed and ran out of her room, barging into her parents' room as she screamed out in fear. Her parents, now fully awake, asked to know why she was screaming. "There is a shadow in my room and it called my name," Amma said as she let out a very loud cry. Her father decided to check the room to see what could have terrified his daughter. He searched thoroughly but found nothing unusual in the room. However, what he noticed was that her window was slightly open. "It might have been the wind that you heard," he said to his daughter Amma, who disagreed with him, saying that something was in her room. "Nothing seems to be here," he said to Amma as he tucked her back in bed, assuring her that everything was a fabrication of her imagination. Seeing how she looked, he decided to stay back in her room till she fell asleep, and a few minutes later, Amma fell into a very deep sleep, and her father snuck out of her room trying not to wake her up. Immediately he left the room, he heard a weird sound and decided to return back to check what it was. To his utmost surprise, he saw his daughter in the dark, sleeping as she stood at the spot. She seemed to be mumbling some strange words with a strange voice that he had never heard before. Amma seemed to obviously be in a very deep sleep and had no idea what she was doing. Her father knew that something had taken over his daughter's body. He tried to wake her up from the trance, but nothing he did worked, as Amma continued to mumble the strange words, then suddenly stopped and fell to the ground unconscious. He yelled out for his wife, who rushed in to meet their daughter lifeless on the ground. "What happened?" Ekene screamed out in fear as she rushed to embrace her daughter's body, trying to wake her up, but Amma seemed so lifeless and cold. "What happened?" she asked again as her husband narrated all that happened to her. "She is dead," Ekene said, her voice filled with regret. "We should have listened to her," her husband replied as Ekene ran quickly to confront Ginika in the boys' quarters. By the time they arrived at the boys' quarters, it was empty. The room reeked of a terrible smell, with blood stains and weird markings that showed that Ginika was indeed a witch. What they did not know was that Ginika was the one behind all the terrible things that had been happening to their daughter. She planned everything out and pretended to be pregnant to gain Ekene's sympathy in church. She even fabricated a story that sounded more like what Ekene and her mother went through in the past to gain her sympathy. This she did because she had tried severally to possess Amma in the dream but couldn't. So, she decided to gain their sympathy so as to gain access to their home to make it easy to possess their daughter. "How did we let this happen?" Ekene said as they rushed Amma to the hospital. "She is dead," the doctor pronounced as Ekene quickly put her daughter in the car and headed straight to the church. Halfway through the journey, their car broke down and came to a complete halt. Panicking, Ekene flagged down a taxi who refused to carry them on sighting the lifeless body of their child. They stood there for some minutes and noticed that no car was willing to help them. They ran for a few minutes and were surrounded by some armed men who hijacked their daughter from them at gunpoint. Ekene watched in terror as the men carted away with her daughter. She wailed uncontrollably, helpless at the thought of never seeing her daughter again. Her hopes dashed as she watched the men drive off with her precious daughter. "What are they going to do with my daughter?" she screamed aloud, the pain piercing the deepest part of her heart. It was a nightmare that seemed to have no end, as they wondered why things were suddenly spiraling out of control. As they sat in their car confused, a young man approached them saying that he had the power to save their daughter. He told them that time was no longer on their side and that they needed to act fast if they ever wanted to see their daughter again. Desperate for a solution, Ekene and her husband Ahanna told the man to do everything within his power to save their daughter. They walked to an abandoned house not too far from the road, and the man requested that some money be dropped to appease the spirits before he can proceed. Ahanna dropped a bundle of money in the bowl as the man began his incantations. As they stood there terrified, the whole place began to shake as the witch appeared before them, fuming in anger. "How dare you summon me?" she yelled angrily at the man, who tried to strike her with his power but failed. The witch let out a terrifying laughter as she turned the man into a monkey before their eyes. Ekene and Ahanna scampered for their dear lives. They had not seen anything like this before. They ran for some minutes and saw a taxi that stopped to give them a ride. "Is everything okay?" the taxi driver asked as he watched them jump into the car, panting and gasping for air. Ekene, grateful to the man for stopping to help them, narrated their story to him, and the man informed them of a very powerful woman who had the power to save their daughter. He took them to her, but immediately the woman set her eyes on them. She began to scream as she chased them away from her presence. They ran out confused and pleaded with the man to take them back to town, but the man was too terrified to stop. He locked his car and zoomed off, leaving them all alone in the strange land. They were so confused and pondered on what to do. Everywhere looked so strange and no one seemed to be in sight to direct them back to town. They walked aimlessly, hoping to find their way back when the skies began to go dark. In the strange land, they walked, their hearts racing with each step that they took, tears pouring down their eyes as they dreaded the thought of losing their only daughter, a child that they prayed for over 10 years. Ekene began to recount how she suffered with numerous stillbirths and how each loss took a part of her with it. The feeling was still fresh in her mind as her heart sank into her stomach. "It's all your fault," her husband said to her in that moment as tears poured down her eyes. "If only we drove off that day, leaving the pregnant woman to cater for herself, we wouldn't be in this situation," he said to Ekene, who also blamed him for leaving their daughter alone on the night that the spirit took her away. Ekene and Ahanna stood there, facing each other, their grief turning into anger and resentment. They continued to walk, harboring anger in their mind for each other. They arrived at a lonely junction, and Ekene angrily took right without consulting her husband Ahanna, who angrily walked in the opposite direction. The road was so dark and lonely, but pride pulled them further apart. As they walked their separate paths, the sound of the forest seemed to close in around them, amplifying their fear and regret. Ekene walked for a few minutes and arrived at an express road. She could remember the road from when they came and realized that she was on the right path. Her husband, however, was obviously on the wrong path, but Ekene could not bring herself to go in search of him. He will find his way eventually, she said to herself as she flagged down a taxi and headed back home. A few hours later, she arrived home and met their house empty. Her daughter was still missing and her husband wandering the strange land alone. Ekene walked into her daughter's room and laid on her bed weeping and regretting all her actions. Not long afterwards, she drifted into a very deep sleep and felt a soft touch on her face. It was her daughter, who had come to assure her that she was still alive. She also gave her the location of where to find her as her spirit dissipated with the wind. Ekene woke up a few minutes later and noticed that her daughter's room window was open. Everywhere was so chilly, and Ekene could remember closing the window earlier when she came into the room. In that instant, she knew that her daughter's spirit had visited with information on where to find her. So, she got up and checked around the house for her husband, who had still not returned. She began to feel a pang of guilt for leaving her husband all alone in the strange land. She waited for a few hours, but still, her husband had still not returned. She picked up a pen and dropped a note for her husband saying, "I am off to the church. I think I know where our daughter is." Then, she hurriedly rushed off to the church to meet their pastor, who did not look shocked to see her. "I have been expecting you," he said to Ekene, who looked at him confused. "We need to save your daughter right now," he said to her as he asked her where her husband was. "I don't know, Pastor," she replied as the pastor shook his head and asked her why she had to allow the witch to come between her husband and herself. He revealed that the witch put confusion between them because she knew that their daughter could only be saved when they come together in unity to command her freedom. So, to ensure that this did not happen, the witch put confusion between them, knowing that their pride would further drive a wedge between them, making it impossible for them to save their daughter, who only had a few hours to be returned back to her body or remain a spirit forever. He said that Amma had a very bright star that the witch was after, and that if Amma was not saved soon, they would lose her forever. Ekene felt a deep sense of regret and guilt as the pastor's words sank in. She realized that they had played right into the witch's hand and regretted why she did not go back in search of her husband. "We must find Ahana and reunite you both before it's too late," the pastor said as they both set out to find her husband. She retraced her steps and found herself back in the strange land, hoping to find Ahana along the way. Meanwhile, Ahana, lost in the forest, stumbled upon an old man close to a small hut. He approached the old man, tired and exhausted, and the old man pointed to a path, telling Ahana to follow the path now. "You must reconcile with your wife, as only together can you defeat the evil that has taken your daughter." Immediately the old man finished talking, he disappeared, and Ahana, filled with so much terror, ran towards the path. He ran for a few minutes and found himself on a familiar road. At that moment, Ahana saw Ekene and the pastor approaching from the distance. He got into the car, grateful to see his wife again. They then drove together and arrived the location where the witch had kept their daughter's body and spirit. It was in an abandoned hut in the forest, and the atmosphere seemed to change as they approached. They could hear strange noises, and the pastor, sensing the evil presence around the forest, began to pray fervently as they all approached the hut. The evil witch sensed their presence and could not hold back her anger. She appeared before them, warning them to retreat, but the pastor, filled with so much authority, commanded her to release their daughter to them. The witch laughed to their faces, saying that Amma now belonged to her and that nothing they would do would ever make her release the girl to them. The pastor said to her that they had no need of her permission. He commanded Ekene and his wife to put their hands together as they prayed with him and called forth their daughter. Ekene and Ahana did as the pastor had instructed. They held hands together in prayer and they called forth their daughter. The witch, seeing the power in their unity, attempted to attack them with her dark magic, but everything she did backfired because of the protective covering around them. The witch in that moment noticed that her power was now waning as their voices grew louder in prayer, overshadowing her evil spells. Amma's spirit, which was so weak and trapped in an enchanted box, began to fight against the witch's hold. The evil witch, now desperate, made one final attempt to silence them, but her evil power backfired, engulfing her in her own evil light as she screamed out in pain and disappeared. Amma in that moment was filled with strength as she stood up and walked out of the box, finding her way back to her body.
Mother! Father!
Amma whispered, her voice weak, as she called out for her parents. Ekene and Ahana rushed to their daughter, embracing her tightly as tears poured down their eyes. They were so overwhelmed with emotion and could not believe that their daughter was in their arms again. They were so grateful to the pastor for his help and thanked him greatly as Ekene, as well as her husband Ahana, apologized to each other for allowing the witch to come between them. They witnessed firsthand the importance of unity and what this unity can do to a family. They all returned home happy to have their daughter back in their life. The events of the past days taught them so much as they apologized to their daughter for ignoring all her warnings and subjecting her to the terror that she had to endure. From that day on, Ekene and Ahana became so cautious of the people that they allowed in their home and ensured to listen to their daughter more, regardless of what the situation was. The lesson to be learned from this story is that light will always overcome darkness. Always be cautious of the people you let into your life, as you never know their motive. Be vigilant, especially around your kids, and do not turn a blind eye to their concerns. Do not let pride rid you of opportunities in life, but embrace humility, which is a necessary ingredient in healthy relationships. Unity and communication are also powerful tools in overcoming challenges, and trusting your instinct can sometimes make all the difference. I hope you enjoyed the story.